The gruesome end of the Knights Templar is said to have been marked by a curse. According to tradition, the last Grand Master of the Order uttered it either in excruciating pain as he was being burnt alive. He may also have said it during an interrogation if the curse existed. It was not directed against Muslims or Jews, but against Pope Clement and the French King Philip. The two men had betrayed the Templars. Overnight, the Order changed from one of the richest and most powerful military organizations on the planet to a collection of outcasts. Not only Grandmaster Jacques de Molay evaded the flames, but many of his brothers as well. The greed of the French king was primarily responsible, but a de facto imprisoned pope also ensured this happened. De Molay is said to have pronounced as a curse that the pope and king must answer to God within a year. In fact, this is what happened. The French monarch in particular suffered a kind of death that many subjects and church members understood to be the work of God. But this is only part of the true medieval horror story that I would like to tell you today. The path of violence up to the year 1314 and the burning of the Grand Master is extreme, even for the time of the Crusades. The beginning of the end of the Knights Templar happened years before it actually fell, and far from its French heartland. On the evening of September 7th, 1303, Pope Boniface's servants prepared his palace in Anagni for the night. The head of the church had retreated to his summer residence south of Rome to carry out a fateful deed the following day: the excommunication of the French King Philip. The latter had allied himself with the Colonna family. Since June 1303, an assembly of barons and ecclesiastical dignitaries had been meeting in Paris to bring about a council to depose Boniface with the king's approval. The Pope wanted to respond with excommunication. However, mercenaries hired by France approached under cover of darkness. They were led by Sciarra Colonna and Guillaume de Nogaret, an advisor to the king. His parents were victims of the Inquisition. The Pope's residence was not the only target that evening. Several cardinals' palaces were also surrounded without the knowledge of their occupants. Then everything happened very quickly. The mercenaries stormed the palaces with the battle cry, "Long live the King of France and Colonna!" Many people died that night. The Pope suffered serious injuries and was taken prisoner. The mercenaries demanded that he hand over the Colonna property, the church treasury, and his resignation. The pontiff refused, which led to further abuse. Boniface was in the hands of the mercenaries for 2 days. Then the citizens of Anagni managed to drive off the attackers and apparently save the Pope. The situation in Rome had also stabilized in the meantime. However, the head of the church's injuries were too severe. He died on September 25th, 1303, and the excommunication of the French king had failed. And even worse, a following conclave took 11 months to elect the Pope. The number of cardinals from France and Italy was identical. Both sides insisted on a compatriot. In the end, the choice fell on the Frenchman Bertrand de Gaulle. He seemed perfectly suited. Not only was he an expert in canon law, but he was also a personal friend of the French king, as well as a loyal member of Boniface's circle of confidence. His chosen name expressed this. As Clement, he recalled his predecessor, who had strengthened papal power, maintained good relations with the French, and fought the Hohenstaufen dynasty. But things were different this time. Philip quickly made it clear that he did not see his friendship with the Pope as an alliance between equals. The head of the church was subordinate to him if he wanted to avoid a repeat of the attack at Anagni. Clement obeyed. His coronation took place in Lyon. A few years later, he even moved the papal residence to France, where it was to remain for almost 70 years. Although the Templars had a few disputes with the Pope over the centuries, they remained loyal to him overall. They were correspondingly shocked by the events of 1303. Their own relationship with the French crown was also strained. The order was a supranational organization that had lost some of its meaning since the fall of the last Crusader fortress of Acre in 1291. The Templars' gigantic fortune was actually used to pay for their own operations in the Holy Land. In some cases, the order even financed entire crusade projects. This had now become redundant. And since the Templars, unlike the Teutonic Order for example, did not have their own sphere of influence, they simply continued to exist. This was particularly critical for France, where most of the Templars were based. They enjoyed numerous privileges from better days. They were what we would call today a state within a state. And unlike the heavily indebted king, they had considerable financial reserves. Philip was therefore quick to listen to the idea of taking action against the Templars and confiscating their assets. He wanted to keep it for himself. However, his advisors quickly intervened and made it clear that this money could only be used for a new crusade project. However, such problems were more of a mental exercise for the French king than a real obstacle. He billed the Templars for their own arrest and exaggerated the sum to the extreme. Giovanni Boccaccio, who wrote in the middle of the 14th century, tells us that there was also a personal component to the king's willingness to take action against the Templars. Jacques incurred the wrath of King Philip of France, who was both his godson's father and deeply adventurous. Philip believed that Jacques had conspired not only against him, but against the entire military order. The situation escalated until, with the permission of Pope Clement V, Philip ordered the arrest of all Templar leaders across his kingdom on a single day, including Jacques, the master of the order. Here we can also read that the Pope is said to have given his permission. However, he was probably presented with a fait accompli. The day it happened was October 13th, 1307, a Friday. In the weeks before, the royal chancellery had secretly sent sealed letters throughout the country, which were only allowed to be opened on this date, and which announced the arrest of the Templars. In Paris alone, 138 people were taken prisoner. In 1309, a papal commission counted that there were still more than 500 prisoners there. The Templars were to be charged with heresy, sodomy, which at that time was synonymous with homosexuality, and idolatry. This was actually the task of the Inquisition, but the French crown refused to hand over the high-ranking Templars. Instead, they were imprisoned in Chinon Castle. For a long time, Philip refused representatives of the Curia access to the prisoners. Only the threat of excommunication made him change his mind. About a year after the arrest, the so-called Chinon parchment was created here, which was only rediscovered by Barbara Frallet in the Vatican secret archives in 2001. According to the Curia, it had probably been inadvertently archived here in the Middle Ages or something. The document is explosive. It is an interrogation protocol of the leading Templars. They proclaimed their innocence, rejected all accusations, and were absolved. In other words, according to canon law, the case was now closed. Specifically, the document states, according to the manner and form above described, we cardinals believe, after all, This, that the same brother, Grand Master of the Order, Jacques, who in our hands abjured the heresy, now confessed, and every other heresy, and took the oath on the Holy Gospels of God, and devotedly requested the benefit of an absolution from these things, to be able to grant the benefit of absolution in the manner of the Church, and to receive himself back into the communion of the Church, and to restore him to the communion of the faithful and the ecclesiastical sacraments. Regarding the accusations made against the Templars, the German historian Michael Hesemann describes the only objectionable thing they ever admitted to was a puzzling slander of Christ in their entrance examination. Some Templars were even asked to spit on the cross, which they formally did, only to confess this sin immediately afterward. We don't know whether this was to simulate a situation in Islamic captivity, whether it was an exercise in humility, so as not to be better than those who had to slander the crucified Christ under pressure, or a kind of collective taboo breaking comparable to the admission rituals of the mafia, where, for example, images of saints are vilified and burned, which still stabs every Sicilian in the heart today. We simply don't know. Because in the confession in which the Templars confessed their sin immediately afterward and repentantly asked for forgiveness, the confessor absolved them. After this act, they were henceforth prepared to take any mortal danger and die for the crucified one. So there can be no question of heresy, nor did the Church ever claim this. On the contrary, the Knights Templar were almost fanatically loyal to the Church. Nevertheless, the first 54 Templars died a cruel death by fire in 1310. They had been tortured. Molay was also first broken under torture, but he recanted shortly afterward. This had saved his life in the first place. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. This was followed by a very lengthy prosecution before the Inquisition court. The Pope originally wanted to save the order. Officially, it was only subject to him anyway. Not a single death sentence was carried out at his own seat in France. However, Philip now tightened the thumbscrews on the Templars actually and on the Pope metaphorically. He threatened to depose him. Clement relented, acknowledged the king's divine closeness, refrained from putting him on trial for all his previous transgressions, and agreed to have the bull Unam Sanctum destroyed, which it was. This bull confirmed the primacy of the Pope over the king. The days of this primacy of the head of the Church over secular rulers were over. In other words, Philip had crushed the Pope and had him under his control. Clement still wanted to save the Templars. He therefore originally wanted to merge them with the Knights of St. John and thus take them out of the line of fire. However, the order rejected this. As a result, the head of the Church convened the Council of Vienne, which opened on October 16, 1311, and was to decide on the Templars. In the end, the order was dissolved by the Pope in the bull Vox in Excelsior. This bull was issued under pressure from a French army outside the city's gates. It is noteworthy that the Pope did not condemn the Templars as a whole. Instead, he justified his decision by stating that the reputation of the order had suffered too much. Specifically, he said, "Indeed, although legal process against the order up to now does not permit its canonical condemnation as heretical by definitive sentence, the good name of the order has been largely taken away by the heresies attributed to it. Moreover, an almost indefinite number of individual members, among whom are the Grand Master and the chief presbyters, have been convicted of such heresies, errors and crimes through their spontaneous confessions. These confessions render the order very suspect, and the infamy and suspicion render it detestable to the Holy Church of God, to her prelates, to kings and other rulers, and to Catholics in general. Although the step did not make it possible to save the members of the order, from the Church's point of view it did at least save much of their property. Clement transferred it to the Knights of St. John. He could do no more. Philip refused anything else. A contemporary witness described the relationship between the Pope and the French king in the following words: "You command and I obey, and so it will always be." The monarch had decided that he would personally take care of the issue of the leading Templars. In his eye, the ecclesiastical proceedings, at the end of which the decisive result was life imprisonment, had lasted far too long. Philip took advantage of de Molay's revocation to inflict the cruelest of punishments. One chronicler who sided with the king wrote, "Without discussing the matter with clerics, he took the sensible decision to consign the two Templars to the flames." The second Templar alongside de Molay was Jacques de Molay, who had previously been the order's preceptor for Normandy. This means that he was a kind of teacher who instructed new members. His lessons were repeatedly the focus of accusations in church proceedings. He therefore played a prominent role. The two men were taken to the Seine island of Ile de Javois after dark. I very certainly butchered the name, I'm sorry. They were taken there after dark on the evening of March 18th, 1314. Here they had to undress. They were then tied to a pole at the stake. They were then given the right to pray one last time. The fire was afterwards set alight. Regardless of whether there was a curse specifically against the king and the pope, de Molay is said to have exclaimed the final threat here in agony: "God knows who is in the wrong and has sinned. Soon misfortune will befall those who have wrongly condemned us. God will avenge our death." A few minutes later, the desperate cries that had previously torn the darkness apart, along with the flames, gave way to silence. All that remained was silence. Giovanni Boccaccio's father is said to have been present and described the scene as follows. Jacques de Molay, who had once provoked the envy of a great king, was reduced to ashes by a terrible stroke of fortune, evoking pity even from the onlookers. The persecution of the Templars was now also intensified in some other countries. In England, for example, the crown also took action against them. Nowhere else, however, did the rulers resort to such extreme measures. Only the Holy Roman Empire completely refrained from persecution, as it was in conflict with the French king. This leads us to the end and the question of whether there was a curse. What is certain is that Clement survived the two leading Templars by only 1 month. He died on April 20th, 1314, and the exact cause is unknown. He may have had cancer. However, his death provoked an early literary connection to the Templars. According to one tradition, a thunderstorm raged on the night of his death, burned the church in which he was laid out, but spared his body. Philip IV died on November 29th, 1314. He was the victim of a wild boar during a hunt. It is said that he had suffered a stroke shortly beforehand and was unable to fend off the animal. This was also interpreted as a judgment from God. Even his own people reacted with relief to his death, as he had ruled brutally. However, there was probably no curse directed specifically at the king and the pope. We cannot find any references to this in any of the contemporary sources. They are missing, for example, in Geoffrey de Paris and Giovanni Villani. Some chronicles report that Boniface could have pronounced the curse and that there was a mix-up. Colette Billon was also able to establish that the Capetians as a whole were considered a cursed family. Although the chronicler Ferrato de Ferretis wrote about a curse in 1330, he attributed it to another Templar whom he did not mention by name. It was not until the beginning of the 16th century that Paolo Emili linked the curse to the two leading Templars. He wrote at the same time as Martin Luther's famous posting of his Theses. It was a time when many people in Europe believed in the purity of Christianity, but had considerable doubts about the Church on this issue. They therefore looked to history for allies. The Templars were suitable for this. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe to support this channel, and bye!